Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday webinar through Florida IP Day. Today we're going to be talking about the Social Studies Challenge and that word that many of us have seen for the first time with the 2014 GED test called Enduring Issues. And that's what Susan and I are going to be covering today as we go forward. On behalf of Susan and myself, we do welcome you to the Florida IP Day Webinar Wednesday. So let's get started. We hope that by this time you have downloaded both the PowerPoint as well as the workbook that goes along with this presentation. Both were available to you via Florida IP Day, and if you do not find those, again, we will reiterate how you do get those documents. Today what we're going to do is talk about those enduring themes in civics and government. What are they and how do we use them? And then we're going to talk a little bit about strategies and activities that you can use to support your students' learning of those enduring issues and how they use them in extended responses. And then, of course, we're going to share some online resources that we've found that we hope you will find useful as well. So, Susan, tell me a little bit about why should we be interested in the challenges in social studies?
Well, there are a couple of things that we have to be thinking about because, let's face it, as we look out there and we think about all of the things that students would normally learn in 4 years of high school and social studies, we don't have time. And so we've got to really focus in our energy into certain areas that are going to be of most value to us. And what we found going through is that, the most missed items, Bonnie, aren't ending up being, what was done in World War II or what countries were in, part of the Allies or the Axis. What we're finding is that students are not able to really be able to identify clearly stated details from what we call primary and secondary sources. And they have to be able to do that if they're going to make logical inferences and valid claims. In other words, students need some truly strong reading skills and then an idea of some of the big concepts or the big ideas in social studies if they're going to be successful. The other thing that is really difficult for our students to do is when you have a text and it describes people and places and processes and events, how are those things connected? That comes from being able to go through and read and see where the links are between them, that this event occurred because certain things was happening with people in different environments, or different things were happening around the world, and here is something that connects those. So again, it comes back to a skill that students need in being able to extract meaning from text. And then this last one really isn't a surprise to anyone because our students are still struggling with cause and effect relationships. And I will put a little caveat on those. In social studies, you may see multiple factors, that multiple causes, and here is the effect of those causes. Or likewise, there may be something happens and then there are multiple effects as a result of it. Those are the kinds of things where our students have to analyze what the relationships are within the text that they're reading. So if you don't have the idea by now, you should have, that reading is such an essential portion of this, and combine that with big ideas and we'll move from there. So Bonnie, if you'll move us to the social studies practices, I'd like everybody to take a really good look at the practices that we have on the next slide. And if you just for a minute kind of scan down through those and look at how many of them are related back to those essential reading but also reasoning skills. Now, there are a few others. For example, interpreting the meaning of symbols. Well, that says to me that I still need to be able to interpret an editorial cartoon and be able to extract meaning from that. But I've got two other things here. Data, graphs, charts, measuring the center of a statistical data set. I mean, those sound like math, Bonnie. They're different. But the nice thing is, the ones you see the check marks by, that relates to the most missed items. So we're doing something really positive in the classroom because those particular areas are not creating as much problem for students. So don't quit. Make sure you keep doing what you're doing, because that is something our students have been able to work with. But you know, we have another issue, and that issue comes back to the extended response. And basically a reason why today we wanted to focus to such an extent on enduring issues is the fact that if our students don't know, one, how to identify an enduring issue, and then two, how that relates to something that they know about, they understand, they're going to have a difficult time in being able to effectively write that extended response. And if memory serves me right, Bonnie, the last time we talked to GD Testing Service, it is a very small percentage of students who are earning any points from their extended response.
You know, that is so true. And as we were listening to some of the things that were being told us, remember that first segment, they can get 2 points on if they can identify the enduring issue, they can set up their claim, and they can support that claim with evidence. Evidence from the excerpts, evidence that, again, responds to that prompt and their own knowledge base of it, and then, of course, that whole thing with enduring issue. But there's also two other areas that they're not gaining points, and one is in development details. The other is in what we know as grammar and sentence structure. So those are things I know that we all teach, not only as we are looking at writing an extended response in social studies, but also RLA. So why aren't they at least getting some points in development and details as well as in grammar and sentence structure? It's the fact that they are not developing enough authentic or original text of their own, but rather just looking at what they're reading and summarizing it. So we have to go a little bit to get them to write their own material, not just summarize, but even more importantly, to identify enduring issues in different types of documents. So as we go forward and talk a little more about enduring issues, just a quick logistical note. If you have questions or comments, I know that all of you are muted today because of the numbers, please use that question box and type in questions, comments, etc., so that throughout the rest of the webinar, as you have comments or issues, we can make sure that that information is shared with everyone. So, having said that, let's get to the gist of things and really look at what in the world are enduring issues. Is it something
Bonnie,
we have done?
Well, you know, Bonnie, it's one of those things that I think if you and I had $1 for every time we had been asked that, we might have been a little closer to retirement. But
oh, you think so? Okay.
I think so, because everyone has had the question, what are enduring issues? And I want everyone to think in terms of the fact that enduring issues are those major themes of civics and government. And that gives you a nice clue here that when you're looking at enduring issues, they are going to fall into civics and government. So you're not going to have some enduring issue that falls over into economics. It's civics and government that we're talking about. So as we look at it, the GD Testing Service has been very explicit in saying that there are 4 different themes of civics and government where this prompt, that social studies extended response, it will always fall under the category of civics and government, and it will fall into one of those 4 themes. So what that says to me, that in the classroom I need to make sure that my students understand what these themes are, and that they have a chance to sit down and maybe brainstorm as a group or work together with me so that they can understand, well, exactly what does that mean? What is an individual's rights versus the good of the community? Or what is separation of powers, checks and balances, states' rights versus federal power? Since we have it so clearly defined, then it's a matter of helping students, one, understand what these things are, but then being able to present them with some different quotes and see if they can figure out, based on, remember, we want them to extract meaning, if they can figure out from the quote what that's referring to, which one of those 4 areas would it fall under. So Bonnie, I think you put together just a little activity that we're going to get everybody involved in terms of doing this. So what we're going to do over the course of the next few slides is we're going to give you a little test of your knowledge. So in just a minute, what we'll start is our first of our polls, and you're going to read a quote or an excerpt. And then what we want you to be able to do is to determine, is it based on an individual's rights versus the good of the community? Does it refer to separation of powers, checks and balances, or states' rights versus federal power? And what we'll do is we'll give you a little time to read the quote, and then we'll have everyone start responding, and we'll see how we do with this. So this is a test of your understanding of civics and government. So Bonnie, are we ready with the first quote?
We are ready. I just want to remind everyone what will happen is after we've given you a chance to read the quote, the polling will start. And so when the polling starts, the quote will disappear, which means you have to remember what you've read and select A, B, C, or D. So let's see what type of enduring issue the first quote is. So please read this quote to yourself, and as you're reading it, determine whether it is individual rights versus good of the community, separation of powers, checks and balances, or states' rights versus federal power.
Are we ready to start the poll?
Let the poll begin, Susan.
Oh, and boy, did we have some people jump in there really fast. Okay, but we've only got 43% have voted so far, so let's keep on moving. We want to get everybody that we can to vote in the poll. And we're going to do this in 5 more seconds. We will close the poll. And the poll is now closed. So let's share those results with everybody. And it appears that we have 65% who say it's an individual's rights versus the good of the community. The separation of powers took 15, checks and balances took 13, and states' rights versus federal power took 8%. So let's take a look, and I will hide those results, and let's pull back to the quote. Take a look. What's my issue? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And that comes down to, we're talking about the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and it is an individual's rights versus the good of the community. So, fantastic for those of you. Now, keep on reading closely as you're going through and check out how the wording goes in these different things. So, Bonnie, you ready to try another one?
Definitely. Let's take a look, and if you will, please read this quote from James Madison. And Susan, if you'd like to open the poll for us, go ahead and select which of those enduring issues is this quote. And Susan, where are we at in the poll?
We have 72% have voted at this point. So let's go. We're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the poll is closed. And let's take a look and see what the results are on this one. And we have 62% who are going for separation of powers, and 28% are going for checks and balances. So let's go back and let's take a look at our results here and talk about it a little bit. So, the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachment of the others. And I understand where the bulk of everybody went, but we really are talking about, in this one, the separation of powers, where we have different areas that each is involved in. Good job. Okay, shall we try another one, Bonnie?
Oh, definitely. And this is a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King from, it's an excerpt from Letter from the Birmingham Jail.
And let's launch the poll. Make your selections. And in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the poll is now closed, and we will share the results. And the overwhelming number is an individual's rights versus the good of the community. And you're absolutely right, because this is about injustice, and this comes from when Dr. King was jailed in Birmingham, following the demonstrations where they were looking at voting rights and civil rights, and so we're looking at an individual's rights as they are across the, against that of the community. So, let's try another one. Bonnie?
Okay, this comes out of our Constitution, Article 6. So go ahead and read the quote and determine which of those enduring issues does this quote fall under?
And we're going to launch the poll. Make your selection. Okay, we only have 64% of you voted. Come on, guys. Let's get the rest of you in there. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The poll is closed. And let's take a look at the results. And states' rights versus federal power. Woohoo! Good job, everyone. The thing that we have to keep in mind here, and the key word within this as you're looking at the quote itself, is that all treaties made. And that does show federal power versus the states' rights, because states don't make individual treaties with other countries or other entities. And so good job in doing that. And so now
We had to put one that is a little easier for all of us, but as we selected this quote, it really leads us to know that there's sometimes language that has to be taught to our students in civics and government. I don't know about your students, Susan, but if my students had seen this quote, they would have said, "Why does John Adams say we need to write a check?"
Ah, yes, using words in different contexts. So
I think that was a verbal
we're not going to keep
clue.
this one open for very long. So vote, guys.
Let's go for 100% voting.
Mm-hmm. Come on, we're at 74%. Give me one more percent at least, guys. Come on. Yay, we went to 76%. Woohoo!
Ask for it and ye shall have.
That's it. That's it, exactly. And we're going to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're closing the poll and sharing the results. And boy, 96% of you, checks and balances. And that is what comes in when we start talking about using different words in different contexts. And what that meant was that check on the power of the office itself. Bonnie, I think we have one more.
Me too.
But it's a little on the long side. So we're going to give you a little bit longer to read through this one, and then we'll have you start the poll after that. Okay. Last poll. Last decision. Make your selection. I love, Bonnie, how fast. There's about 27% of the voters out there who were popping in before the first 10 seconds have elapsed.
Now, I would do that, or otherwise I'd forget what I'd read. So, you
That's
know,
true.
good to
That's
get in
true.
there right away.
That's right.
It's the last one, guys, so let's get a really high percentage on this one.
Come on, we're at 69%. Break on through, guys. Yay! Woohoo! All right, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're closing the poll, and the response is 82% of you saying states' rights versus federal power, and you're absolutely correct. This one outlines how there were differences in what was expected from the federal government, which versus all those things that states would have to deal with that were quite different. Things like education and, you know, dealing with roads and dealing with different things at the state level. So that's a much longer quote, but at the same time dealing with those particular issues. A couple of things, and I'll go ahead and just hide these results here so Bonnie can pull back up the PowerPoint itself. What Bonnie and I did to put this together is that we just did a search on famous quotes about checks and balances, famous quotes about individual rights. We did that in order to put together these different quotes. So they didn't come from the GD testing service. But what you can do, it's very simple to go out there and you'll find lots of quotes that you can use, and you could even have the quote of the day. And students have to, before the end of the day, they have to determine which one it is, and you spend about 5 minutes discussing it. Our students need practice because, number one, so many of the quotes are, you know, they're coming from primary sources. They're not always the easiest thing to read as we're going through, but our students need to really become familiar with them. Now, from here, where do you go? Well, I think it's fairly clear by looking at the 4 sections that are included in the enduring issues, is that our students need to have an understanding of the U.S. Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean that you're reading every single word, but I would certainly make sure that you spend some time working on the preamble and also the Bill of Rights so that students understand sense to them. You can use close reading strategies and chunk that text into small pieces and take on a portion for just a 15-minute section during a class period. You don't have to look at teaching a 1-hour lesson, but rather that you're introducing different topics. You need to discuss those issues. What do they mean? And can students come up with real-world examples? If you use those quotes, have the student identify the issue, and then they come back in and they identify examples that they can relate to, because when they go to write that extended response, they're going to have to take an issue, an enduring issue, and they're going to have to connect it to some knowledge that they have. And so it would be important for our students to have some time in the classroom to do that. So when they get into the test, they go, oh yeah, we talked about this in class. These are some of the kinds of things that we have. And so we want to make sure that there is an understanding within these of those different issues. Okay, I have a question and from someone that says, why are checks and balances and separation of powers separate enduring issues? And it seems that they are too closely interrelated to the separate issues. They are related. However, when they talk about the separation of powers, it's helping students understand that the executive does certain things, the legislative branch does certain things, and then also that the judiciary does something different. Now, when we start to talk about checks and balances, we talk about how when Congress passes legislation, there is a check on that by having a president who will either sign the bill into law or can in turn veto that. So there's the check that's done. So first our students need to understand what those separate powers are, what is within each of those bodies, and then how do they play checks on each other. So Congress may pass a law, but then it goes to court and the Supreme Court rules that it is not constitutional. So they have to understand both sections of that. So hopefully that helps in that one. And that's a really good question, because that will be a question that your students ask.
So where do we get started? If you have not, two things that you're going to want to make sure that students have access to are a printable transcript of both the U.S. Constitution and of the Bill of Rights. They need to see what those look like, and for a myriad of different activities that you can do in the classroom. A couple we're going to talk about today. And as Susan said, Google, Bing, any major search engine is your best friend as you're looking at using different quotes in the classroom. One of the things that Susan and I have done for many years is to provide students with that First Amendment, and then a newspaper, a daily newspaper, a USA Today, or of course in today's world even some of the online papers, and having students find articles. Sometimes, of course, they are things like advertisements that really support each of those major freedoms that are found in the First Amendment. What that does is shows them not only is the First Amendment is as necessary in today's world as it was when it was written a couple hundred years ago, but it also shows students that these types of freedoms are alive and well in today's world and helps them connect. So if one of the enduring issues deals with, freedom of speech or freedom of the press or right to assemble, you have already provided them with some venues to access personal knowledge based upon historic perspective. So that's a connection piece, and I can't imagine any student not needing that basic understanding of something as important to our individual rights as the First Amendment. As Susan said, our students do not need to, quote, memorize or have taken, for lack of a better term, a close read of the entire Constitution. But on the website, there is a lesson plan that takes them through just the big ideas of the Constitution via, again, a scavenger hunt. And that type of activity, again, gets them familiar with the Constitution, the fact that it's divided into different segments, and the kinds of information that exist in our Constitution. No, they don't have to know, what Amendment 4 says versus, Article 2. But by having some familiarity with our Constitution, they again will have some background knowledge that should serve them well, not only on this test, but as citizens of the U.S. So we'll show you this because we also included some of these things in your workbook. But just realize these are, some beginning ways to help your students be, again, more knowledgeable about civics and government. And Susan talked about this earlier, the fact that we can start our lessons with a quote. And we've all seen this quote from FDR. In fact, I think GED Testing Service used it for a while as people were so fearful of having their students take the new GED test. All we have to fear is, yes, fear itself. But that type of usage of quotes in the classroom, again, helps our students connect to those big ideas of social studies. And, of course, making sure that you do discuss those enduring issues with open-ended questions and connections. That you ask questions such as, according to this, what are, how are, those nice open-ended questions, and then examples of this principle as a recurring theme in U.S. history. Because as we look at history and government, there are recurring themes, and so these enduring issues are enduring because they have followed us throughout the years. And there again, we'll show you in just a moment in your workbook, you have some open-ended questions to ask about some of these big ideas that you should be able to use in your classroom with students not only at the GED level, but also students at the ABE level, or for those of you who are teaching not only multi-level but multi-grouping. Our ESL students, ESOL students also need this big understanding. So, more about that in a moment before we end. But the other thing is, if you're not doing it yet, our students need time to read anchor papers so that as they're looking at papers that were written for the different prompts, as they look at these papers and they see the annotations from GEDTS, then they're better able to say, now I understand what is needed to get a good score. Now I understand what they mean when they say you need to cite certain evidence. Again, I can't think of anything more important, whether it is in RLA, social studies, or science, then our students having effective models of writing that they can, quote, model their writing after. So just like in RLA, we need to have our students not only unpack the prompt, but read closely the excerpts that are provided, determine what that enduring issue is, and then if we're using the sample anchor papers, that they look at those papers and see, can they identify the writer's claim? Can they identify the text-based evidence? And can they identify the writer's knowledge of the enduring issue? If they can do those things, then again, they are better able to model. So, Susan, shall we look at one example?
Well, yes, and let's go back real quick, and we're going to look at the excerpt, and we're going to look at what the prompt says for them to do. And as you go through, you can see that there is an excerpt that goes along with this, and all of us have seen this one. This one has the Amelia Parsons letter that goes along with it. But first, we are always faced, and in this case we're faced with a quote from Thomas Jefferson that reflects an enduring issue. And we have to go through first and determine what that enduring issue is. And as I go through, I'm looking at it going, all two will bear in mind this sacred principle, that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights which equal laws must protect, and to violate which would be oppression. So I've heard the words majority, I've seen minority, I've seen equal rights and equal laws. So that points me in the direction of this is about individual rights. Whether you are in the minority or the majority, you still have rights. So as we're going through, what we have to do is we've seen that, okay, what we're looking at here is the rights of minorities to express their views. Now we have to go in and it says incorporate relevant and specific evidence from the excerpt, then the letter, and your own knowledge to support your analysis. So now as we look at a sample of writing, then we can see those individual pieces coming in, where in the first sentence, Thomas Jefferson, you can see the evidence coming from that excerpt that the rights of the minority will not be infringed upon. And then you see that there's a connection made by the letter submitted by Mrs. Parsons continues to uphold this principle almost 150 years later. Now, There's further evidence as provided because in the Parsons level it talks about the Supreme Court and the Pledge of Allegiance. But take a look into the third paragraph. There's nothing wrong with asking children to say the Pledge of Allegiance. It is wrong, nevertheless, to require this be done under penalty of punishment. And look what the student does. It actually connects that right of the minority to the Nazis and what was happening within Hitler's regime itself. So that student is saying, look, here was a case when people didn't have those rights. They weren't respecting the rights of the minority as we're going through. Those are the kinds of things that our students need to be able to do. This is a 2 for trait 1, meaning that it has given a clear argument that shows how all that's connected between the quote and the letter. There's evidence, and that student actually brought their own evidence into this. Now, does a student have to talk about, Hitler's Germany and what was going on? No, they may come back and talk about other issues. But again, it's about students being able not to bring their opinion in, but being able to bring in an understanding of what those issues are and how they're impacted. Only by doing that last one is a student going to score the maximum, which is 2 points that you can get for trait 1.
And Susan, as I looked at this writing sample, one of the things I noticed too was when I went back to the actual excerpts, the words don't really match. This student is actually taking that information and using his or her own words. And so from that aspect, there's a nice flow or development of ideas. And because this student has written his or her own words, there's enough text for GED testing service to say, okay, I now know that this student's able to use diverse sentence structure and knows how to use the grammar skills that we expect.
And that's what this comes down to, is that you don't have students out there who are parroting what they just read, but rather that they're taking that and analyzing that information and then being able to explain it to someone. It's fine and good for me to go back and just, this is this, and this, but that doesn't give anybody an understanding that I know what I'm talking about. I can, if I'm just copying information down. Now, that's not to say that a student can't use a quote or two in their writing. However, it's one thing to quote something and then explain why that quote is important versus having a student who goes through and has to have everything that is just copied. That's the issue that we're running into over and over.
So what is required as they go forward? Social Studies ER requires these skills. And again, they have to analyze the ideas, analyze or evaluate. That's a higher order skill than just, again, as Susan was saying, summarizing what was written by others. They have to recognize the context of the source materials for the prompt. So there again, they're able to create that argument of how those texts are related. And the former writing sample did show that that student understood how those texts were related and was able to support all of her claims or his claims with evidence drawn from the text. And then, as we said before, elements from the passages into the presentation of your own ideas. Not an I, but your historical knowledge of that enduring issue. And there again, we want our students to write well-developed ideas, and we want them to have those basic skills of writing that have diverse sentence structure, and again, that they have truly read what they've written, so those errors in grammar are caught. And what we continue to hear is, although students for this time frame have 25 minutes to write their extended response, they continue to not use all 25 minutes, even though they cannot use a portion of that 25 minutes for any other part of the test. That tells Susan and me that our students are not taking the time to not only draft an effective writing sample, but they probably are not taking the time to reread and edit and revise what they've written. So,
Okay. Bonnie, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because this question that we just had come out, I think is something that probably everybody out there, and as we're talking about what's required within this, here's the question. Where in this response does the student clearly state the enduring issue they are discussing? Should students explicitly state the enduring issue is anywhere in their response? And Bonnie has pulled that back up for us. And the enduring issue, we really don't want students to go at it from the enduring issue is. However, in the first paragraph, the enduring issue is clearly stated because the student, one, has referred to Thomas Jefferson, that while the country will be represented by the desires of the majority, that the rights of the minority will not be infringed upon in the process. That lets the reader know that this student understands the enduring issue, because it is also then stated as she goes into, or he goes into the next part. The letter demonstrates the country continues to uphold this principle. Now, how does the student prove that they're continuing to uphold this? It is by the next paragraph where the student has said, where the writer here has come back in and talked about the Supreme Court decision to strike down the requirement that all students recite the Pledge of Allegiance. That reiterates that the student understands that the enduring issue is about minority rights. And we want to make sure that what we don't have is what we would have in our previous writing, which was that we would have, you know, my essay topic is boom, 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 boom. We want students to be able to demonstrate they understand that enduring issue, but avoid saying the enduring issue is, because that's at a whole different level of writing than where we're expecting our students to be. And I think that was just a great question as we're talking about the requirements here.
And we do want to reiterate that this student has explicitly stated the enduring issue. We do not want them to, quote, just imply. So, but there's many ways to explicitly state it, as Susan said, without saying the enduring issue is. The first reason is, the second reason is. So there again, in order to get it into this kind of writing, which is higher order writing, we need to teach students how to take that, the enduring issue is blah, 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 and again, for lack of a better term, massage that sentence so that it comes out sounding much higher order, which this one does. So thank you. Great.
Very much. We appreciate that. As we're going through just a couple of other things, and then we're going to go over to the workbook in just a minute. But there, on the next slide, you can see a sample graphic organizer. This may be one way that you want to work with students on some social studies writing, where they identify the issue, they show how it relates, then they bring their evidence in, and then their own knowledge. So this would give them a framework from working and then writing as a result of that. So, you know, it is, for some students, this works extremely well to have that kind of organizer that helps them sort through their thoughts. The other thing is that on the next page, you actually have some sentence starters or some writing frames that are some things that we could start using with students. where such and such states the enduring principle, or such and such explains, or the first way the enduring principle is by, and so on. Sometimes our students need those writing frames. We've talked about those with thesis statements when we're talking reasoning through language arts. The thing that Bonnie would tell you, as well as I would, is that you don't want students to depend on those for too long. You want them to be able to be comfortable with the process and be able to move on into developing their own sentences. These are just getting started types of things that you have for students.
And there's no magical the first way, the second way. Again, as Susan said, for lack of a better term, this is an outline. And so it at least provides them with the very basic. So if they have more ways in which these support the enduring issue or the enduring principle, so much the better. But these came from fellow teachers who said our students need at least something to get started with before, again, we can make it a better or more effective writing sample.
So we're going to go to one more slide, and then we're going over to the workbook. So, or we can go to the workbook, either one. Which
yeah, I'll go
okay.
there.
Okay. This is something that you will have this resource with you. Steve Schmidt from Appalachian State University has done a wonderful YouTube video. It's a little over 20 minutes, but it is on the finer points of writing the GED 2014 Social Studies Extended for our students. This is a great place to start, to have students go in and watch that YouTube video, and they could do it whenever. I mean, they could watch it on their smartphones, they could do whatever. But he has really done an excellent job in walking through all those individual steps, and so take advantage of that resource. Don't reinvent the wheel, but certainly make modifications if you need to. So having said that, we will go over and take a look at the workbook, because there are a ton of resources that are included in here, and if you haven't downloaded them, then you'll be able to go back to the IPDAY site and download from there so that you can pull these in. But starting out here, you have enduring issues that pop up on page 2. And then this is something that Bonnie found the other day, and I think it is absolutely wonderful. It comes from the New York Regents exam for U.S. History and Government, but it is 13 enduring constitutional issues. And I would just love it if all of our students understood all of this, because it so impacts them as individuals. And so and there are a number of different things that are included here. So you will find all of those materials. Starting on page 7, you actually have looking at anchor papers, and you have the prompt and those excerpts, but behind that you have the actual full-blown text, and because I know on the screen it was hard to see, but also the annotations that go along with that and how this was scored. And I think Bonnie really said it best earlier. If our students need to see this, but first of all, we need to see these as well as we're going through. Now, let's see. Some sample constructed response type items. This also comes from Appalachian State. Steve Schmidt and his group there put together some samples that if you want something to use, then certainly use these. These are not constructed by the GED Testing Service, but I think they did a great job in mirroring the way that those are set up for GEDTS and in developing those prompts. So they did a great job there. So you have 3 of those.
And again, hopefully what it shows you is that these are not difficult to develop. Probably the most difficult thing, in my opinion, is to find 2 different excerpts. That takes a little bit of time. But there again, as you're teaching some of these main ideas of the enduring issues, think about, okay, here's a quote. What can I find that goes along with that? So I can set up some of my own prompts for discussion.
And then you have the graphic organizer that we talked about. The First Amendment scavenger hunt. There are actually two scavenger hunts, one for the First Amendment, one that deals with the Constitution. And that's the one Bonnie was referencing earlier. You know, our students, at the very least, we could hope that our students could learn as much about the Constitution as those who are going to take a citizenship test. And so this would really be great if our students could master the information here and really be able to understand what their rights are as well as their responsibilities. And on page 18 you have an answer key, 18 and 19, which always comes in
Finally.
nice. Finally. You also have resources from the World Wide Web. There are a number of different things that are included here. Digital history, Docs Teach, the National Archives. Please don't forget about some of those. NPR, the History Channel, the Library of Congress. There are so many resources that are out there that can be taken advantage of, and I would certainly do that. The other thing is the last few pages that you have are a civics vocabulary matching game. This particular one is from Appalachian State as well. They developed this with grants, and so you can use this material as you're going through. And I think it's wonderful because it helps students understand the vocabulary of civics and government. There are a lot of different resources that are out there, and you can find on page 21 at the very bottom is the website for Appalachian State. And that will also link you to that YouTube video as well. There's a couple questions that have come in, and I know we're just about out of time. Will this slideshow be available to us after the webinar? Actually, the PowerPoint is already posted for people, so you can go ahead and download that. And all of the links are included in there. And where can we find text that's not copyrighted so we can make copies? And I'm not sure. All of the materials that we have provided to you can be copied as you need to.
And I was going to say, I've pulled up the page on the workbook that you can see that disclaimer that these materials may be used and reproduced. So,
for educational purposes.
Yeah.
So please feel free to do that. As far as all of the materials from Appalachian State, likewise, they have included material there that can be used in the classroom. And without any copyright issues. So they have been very, very good in doing that. So that, again, another resource for you.
We hope that answers that question, because again, we do want these materials used to full advantage, and as you go through some of them you may find, gee, this graphic organizer would work a little better for me and my students if. Please feel free to make them your own that way, because again, all students are a little bit different, so certain things that work in this format may work better in a little different one.
Absolutely. So, having said that, if there are any other questions, we'll be more than happy to take those. We appreciate your having been with us today. And hope that you will be joining us and also joining EPDAY for a lot of other webinars that are coming your way on the Wednesdays to come, because I know that there are a number of different things that are out there. And if you have questions or if you have concerns, please feel free to let us know, and make sure that you are going out to the EPDAY website on a regular basis, because you just never know what new materials you're going to find. Plus, I wouldn't ever miss the tip of the week, because you never know what you're going to find out when you go out there.
So, having said that, any additional questions that anyone has as we go to close out for the day? As Susan said, we'd like to thank you so very much for being with us. Tune in a little bit later this spring. We're going to be doing some things on RLA and that wonderful thing called College Career Readiness Standards, since our ABE programs are, again, basing their language arts curriculum on those new frameworks that came out this year. So having said that, Susan, I see no more questions for today. As always, thank you very much for joining us on Florida IP Day, and have a great rest of the week.